Stepmom and her daughter accused me of bagging guys for money. Dad believed them and kicked me out. But my dad called me later begging to reconcile. I was 17 when my dad remarried. It wasn't like I was mad about it or anything, you know? My mom had passed away when I was 12, and for a while it was just me and Dad. We weren't super close, but we got along fine. He did his thing, I did mine. When he started dating again, I figured it was just him trying to get his life back on track after everything. Honestly, I didn't think much of it when he introduced me to Claire, my stepmom, and her daughter Nicole. They seemed all right at first, especially since Dad seemed happy, and I didn't want to mess that up. When we all moved in together, that's when things started to feel off. We moved into this duplex Dad had bought. We lived upstairs, and he rented out the downstairs as an Airbnb for some extra cash. I thought it was cool at first because the setup gave everyone their space. Plus, I figured living with another girl around my age might not be so bad. Nicole was 18, and I thought we'd have at least some common ground. Turns out I was wrong. The weird thing was that Claire and Nicole were always super nice when Dad was around. They'd ask me how school was going, offer to cook dinner sometimes, and just be generally pleasant. But the second Dad left the house, it was like a switch flipped. Claire would give me these cold looks like I didn't belong, and Nicole, well, she made my life hell in her own little way. Nicole had this group of friends she'd hang out with who weren't exactly the best crowd. I'm not going to pretend I was some kind of angel or whatever, but the people she brought around the house were shady as hell. They were always whispering about stuff, doing things behind closed doors. And Nicole? She'd always have this smug look on her face like she knew something I didn't. At school, things weren't much better. Nicole acted like she owned the place. She was popular in that fake way, you know? The kind of person who everyone sucked up to because they were afraid of being on her bad side. And trust me, I ended up on her bad side real quick. I don't even remember what started it, but she made sure to make me feel like an outsider at every opportunity. She'd spread rumors, pick on me in front of others, and just generally made school unbearable. It wasn't just school, though. At home, she'd do little things to get under my skin. She'd take my stuff without asking, or if I had plans to hang out with friends, she'd accidentally tell them I canceled. Once I had this project I'd been working on for weeks, and she accidentally spilled coffee all over it. When I confronted her, she just shrugged and said I should have kept it somewhere safer. I couldn't say anything to Dad, because every time I tried, she'd play the victim and twist the story to make it seem like I was overreacting. Claire always backed her up too. It was like they were a tag team, ready to gang up on me whenever they had the chance. Dad didn't see any of it. He was too busy with work and making sure the Airbnb was running smoothly. Anytime I tried to bring it up, he'd brush it off, saying something like, "Nicole's just going through a phase. Don't take it personally." Yeah, easy for him to say when he wasn't the one getting bullied in his own house. The whole Airbnb thing was another problem. My dad rented the downstairs to random people almost every week. Some were fine, just tourists passing through, but others, let's just say they weren't the kind of people you'd want hanging around your house. Nicole noticed this too, but in a different way. She started bringing guys around, not the kind of guys who just wanted to hang out either. They were sketchy, and I swear they were involved in some illegal stuff. I even saw Nicole exchange things with them a few times when she thought no one was looking, but I couldn't prove anything. Things escalated when Nicole started sneaking down to the Airbnb with these guys. I didn't know what was going on down there, but I had a feeling it wasn't good. I tried telling Dad that something felt off about the people Nicole was hanging out with, but he brushed it off again, saying I was being paranoid. He trusted Claire and Nicole way more than he trusted me, and it showed. One night, something happened that made everything worse. Dad came home late from work, and as he was pulling into the driveway, he heard voices coming from the Airbnb downstairs. He thought it was just another guest, but when he checked the Airbnb app, there were no reservations for that night. Naturally, he assumed someone had broken in, so he decided to check it out. He went downstairs, and that's when he heard a guy's voice ask, "How much for full sex?" Yeah, Dad lost it. He stormed upstairs, thinking Claire had rented the Airbnb without telling him, or worse, that someone was using it as some kind of, pleasure house. He demanded answers, but Claire acted all confused, saying she didn't know anything about it. Dad went back downstairs, but by the time he opened the door, the guy had already jumped out the window with some girl. They were gone before Dad could get a good look at them. When I got home later that night, Dad was waiting for me, pacing the living room like a madman. He told me the whole story, and I tried to play it cool, but I was freaking out inside. The idea that someone might be using the Airbnb for that, it made me sick. I didn't know what to say, so I just mumbled something about it probably being some homeless people sneaking in. That's when Nicole walked into the room, acting all innocent like she didn't know what was going on. I could see right through her. But Dad? He didn't. He just looked at me and said, "We'll talk more about this tomorrow." And that was that. I barely slept that night, trying to figure out what was going on and how to deal with it. I had a sinking feeling that Nicole was involved somehow, but I had no proof. All I knew was that things were getting worse and I was stuck in the middle of it. The next morning was tense. Dad was already up before I was, which was unusual since he usually left for work early. When I walked into the kitchen, he was sitting at the table with a look on his face that instantly told me things were not going to go well. Claire was standing by the counter, acting like she was busy making coffee, but I could feel her watching me out of the corner of her eye. Nicole wasn't around, probably still in her room, pretending like nothing happened the night before. I barely had time to grab a piece of toast before Dad started. "We need to talk." That's never a good sign. I sat down across from him, trying to keep my cool, but my heart was racing. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept at all, and there was this weird tension in the air. Claire kept glancing over, but she wasn't saying anything, just letting Dad do all the talking. "About last night," he started, rubbing his face like he was trying to figure out the right words. "I talked to the police this morning." My stomach dropped. "Police? What the hell?" "They came by and said there was no sign of forced entry into the Airbnb. No broken windows, no tampered locks. The place was unlocked." He paused, looking at me like I was supposed to know what he was getting at. "Which means someone had a key." I nodded slowly, trying to follow, but I didn't know where he was going with this. "And Claire told me you asked for the spare key yesterday." That was news to me. "What? I never took the key." He shook his head, clearly not believing me. "She said you did." Now I could feel Claire's eyes on me, waiting for me to slip up or admit something. But I didn't have anything to admit because I never took the damn key. "I didn't ask for the key. I didn't even know there was a spare," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why would I need it?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Dad said, his voice rising. "Because as far as I'm concerned, you're the only one who could have opened that Airbnb." I was speechless for a second. My mind was racing, trying to piece everything together. Why the hell would he think I'd sneak into the Airbnb? Then it clicked. Nicole. She must have taken the key. I remembered seeing her with it the day before, fiddling with it like it was no big deal. But I didn't think much of it at the time. "It wasn't me," I said firmly. "I swear, it was Nicole. I saw her with the key yesterday." The second her name left my mouth, Claire whipped around, finally joining the conversation. "Nicole had nothing to do with this," she snapped. "She's been home all night." I blinked at her, my frustration building. "I saw her with the key, Claire. I'm not making this up." "You're lying," she shot back, her voice sharp. "Nicole doesn't sneak around with boys like that. She's not the one who was caught down there. You were." That was it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were seriously accusing me of being in the Airbnb, hooking up with some random guy, and they weren't even giving me a chance to defend myself. "I wasn't there!" I shouted, standing up from the table, my anger boiling over. "You're just protecting Nicole because you don't want Dad to know what she's really like." Before I knew it, Dad was on his feet too. "That's enough," he yelled, his face red. "I've had enough of your excuses. I can't believe you'd sneak around like that in my house and then try to blame it on Nicole. I raised you better than that." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. He wasn't even giving me a chance to explain. In his mind, I was guilty. No questions asked. "I didn't do anything," I repeated, my voice shaky. "You're wrong." But he wasn't listening. He grabbed my arm and marched me to the front door, his grip tight. "I can't have you living here if this is how you're going to act. I can't trust you anymore." I stared at him in shock. Was he seriously doing this? Kicking me out over something I didn't even do? "Dad, please," I started, trying to pull away from his grip, but he wasn't having it. "Get your stuff and go," he said coldly. "You're not welcome here anymore." Claire was standing behind him, arms crossed, her face twisted in that smug look I'd grown to hate. She was loving this. Nicole wasn't even in the room, probably hiding away in her bedroom, pretending none of this was happening. I didn't even argue anymore. There was no point. Dad had made up his mind, and there was nothing I could say to change it. I went to my room, packed a bag with whatever I could grab, and left. The second I stepped outside, reality hit me like a brick. I didn't have anywhere to go. I didn't have money. I didn't have a job, and now I didn't have a home. I stood in the driveway for a minute, trying to figure out what to do next. My whole life had just been ripped away, and I didn't even know why. All because of Nicole's lies and Claire's manipulation. As I walked down the street, it started to sink in just how alone I was. No friends nearby, no family I could turn to. It felt like the world had turned its back on me. The worst part? I knew Nicole was getting away with it. She was probably sitting in the house right now, laughing at how easily she'd pinned everything on me. And Dad, he'd never believe me over her. I ended up wandering around for hours, trying to come up with some sort of plan. Eventually, I found a place to crash for the night, but it wasn't much. I was scared, confused, and angry all at the same time. How did things go so wrong so fast? As I lay there staring up at the ceiling, all I could think about was getting revenge. I wasn't going to let Nicole and Claire get away with this. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to clear my name and show Dad the truth, no matter what it took. I had never thought I'd end up homeless. Not like this, anyway. I wasn't prepared for it at all. One minute I was in my room, minding my own business, and the next, I was on the street with a bag full of random clothes and no place to go. My own dad didn't even hesitate to kick me out. I mean, how could he do that? How could he believe them so easily? But there I was, walking down the street, feeling completely lost. For the first few days, I just crashed wherever I could. Sometimes I stayed with a friend who didn't ask too many questions, but I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I didn't want to explain the whole thing to anyone either. It was embarrassing, you know? Telling people that your dad kicked you out because your stepmom and her daughter lied about you? I didn't have the energy for it. Money was the next big problem. I didn't have a job, and I wasn't in school anymore, so finding one felt impossible. Most places wouldn't hire me without some kind of experience or diploma. I'd walk around all day looking for any kind of work, anything that could help me get back on my feet. But it felt like no one wanted to give me a chance. That first week was the worst. I slept in bus stations, libraries, anywhere I wouldn't get kicked out of. I kept thinking, why me? Why did this have to happen to me? It's hard not to feel sorry for yourself when your whole world falls apart like that. I didn't have anyone I could call for help, not really. And it wasn't like I could just go crawling back to my dad's house, not after the way he treated me. I didn't even want to see Claire or Nicole again, not if I could help it. After a couple of weeks, I finally got a break. There was this small diner on the edge of town that was hiring for a part-time dishwasher. The pay wasn't great, but I didn't care. It was something. I walked in and basically begged the manager for the job, and to my surprise, he gave it to me on the spot. I guess he could tell how desperate I was, and he didn't seem like the kind of guy who asked too many questions. The diner wasn't glamorous, and the work was tough. I spent hours scrubbing plates, cleaning the kitchen, and taking out the trash. It wasn't what I imagined myself doing, but it was better than nothing. I needed the money, and it gave me a reason to keep going. The people at the diner were decent too. The manager, Carl, was rough around the edges, but fair. He didn't bother me about my situation, and I appreciated that. There was another girl working there, Jess, who was a waitress. She noticed pretty quickly that I wasn't exactly in a good place. One night after we closed up, she asked me if everything was all right. I wasn't planning on opening up to anyone, but something about her just made me trust her. I told her the basics, that my dad kicked me out because of some lies, that I didn't really have anywhere to go, and that I was just trying to get by. She didn't judge me, which was a relief. Instead, she offered to let me crash on her couch for a while, no strings attached. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to be a burden, but at the same time, I couldn't keep sleeping in random places forever. So, I said yes. Staying with Jess was a game changer. For the first time in weeks, I didn't have to worry about where I was going to sleep. She had this small apartment downtown, and while it wasn't much, it felt like a palace compared to where I had been staying. I had my own space on the couch, and she didn't ask for rent or anything. She just wanted to help. Living with her wasn't perfect, though. I still felt like an outsider, like I didn't belong anywhere. Every day I thought about my dad and how he hadn't even tried to reach out to me. It hurt more than I like to admit. I kept replaying the fight in my head, wondering what I could have said or done differently to make him believe me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about what I said. It was about Nicole and Claire. They had him wrapped around their fingers, and nothing I could have done would have changed that. While I was trying to figure things out, I kept working at the diner, saving up whatever little money I could. Jess was cool about me staying with her, but I didn't want to overstay my welcome. I wanted to stand on my own 2 feet again, even if it seemed impossible at times. After a couple of months, things started to look up. I saved enough to get my own place, a small rundown room in a shared house. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I could finally stop relying on other people. The room was tiny, just enough space for a bed and a dresser, but it felt like I was rebuilding my life, piece by piece. Slowly, I started to feel like myself again, even if I was still haunted by everything that had happened. I didn't hear from my dad at all during this time. Not one phone call, not even a text. It was like I didn't exist to him anymore, and that stung. Part of me wanted to call him, but I wasn't sure if I could handle another rejection, so I just left it alone. Then one day, out of nowhere, I met this guy at the diner. He came in for lunch and we started talking while I was cleaning up the tables. His name was Tyler, and he was probably the first person in months who didn't make me feel like a complete mess. We hit it off right away. He was funny, down to earth, and didn't ask too many questions about my past. He seemed to like me for me, not for what had happened to me. After a few weeks of getting to know each other, we started hanging out outside of work. It was nice, having someone to talk to and spend time with who wasn't tied to all the drama I'd been through. Tyler didn't care about my messy family situation, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. He gave me hope, you know? Hope that things could get better, that maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Looking back, those first few months after getting kicked out were some of the hardest I'd ever been through. But I survived. I found a job, made new friends, and even though it still hurt, I was starting to move on. Every day, I reminded myself that I didn't need my dad or Claire or Nicole to define who I was. I was stronger than that. But as life usually goes, just when I thought things were settling down, everything took a turn again. And this time, it wasn't something I could ignore. Things had started to feel somewhat normal again after a few months of settling into my own little space. I had a routine going, working at the diner, hanging out with Tyler, and keeping my distance from my dad and all that drama. I wasn't over it, not by a long shot, but I was doing my best to push it to the back of my mind. Then one day, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed while I was on break at the diner. I glanced at the screen and froze. It was my dad. I hadn't heard from him since the day he threw me out. For a second, I just stared at the phone, not sure if I should even pick up. I mean, after everything, what could he possibly want now? But something in me, it was like this instinct or something, made me swipe the screen and answer. "Hello?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause on the other end, like he didn't expect me to actually pick up. Then I heard him sigh, like he was relieved or something. "Hey, it's me." I rolled my eyes. Who else would it be? I stayed quiet, waiting for him to say whatever it was he needed to get off his chest. I know it's been a while," he continued, his voice shaky. I just wanted to talk." I could feel my chest tightening with anger. Now he wanted to talk? After all this time? After believing Claire and Nicole's lies and kicking me out without even letting me defend myself? "What do you want, Dad?" I asked, not even trying to hide the frustration in my voice. He cleared his throat, and I could hear him struggling to find the right words. "Look, I made a mistake. A big one. I know I should have listened to you. I should have believed you, but I didn't." There it was. An apology, or at least the start of one. But it didn't feel like enough. Not after everything I'd been through. "Yeah, you should have," I shot back, the words coming out sharper than I meant. "You threw me out, Dad. You didn't even give me a chance to explain." "I know," he said quickly, like he was trying to stop me from going off. "I know, and I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was stupid. I didn't want to believe that Nicole or Claire could do something like that. I didn't want to believe it, so I convinced myself it had to be you." I sat there in silence, letting his words sink in. He didn't want to believe it? That was his excuse for throwing me out onto the street? "I found out the truth," he added quietly, almost like he was ashamed. "I know it was Nicole. I saw it with my own eyes. I installed cameras in the Airbnb after you left, and well, it wasn't long before I caught her sneaking in, guys. She was the one using the place, not you." Hearing him admit it didn't bring the relief I thought it would. I mean, yeah, I was glad he finally knew the truth, but it didn't change what had happened. It didn't erase the fact that he kicked me out without a second thought, all because he didn't want to see the truth right in front of him. I don't know what to say," I muttered, staring at the floor of the break room, my emotions all over the place. "You didn't believe me, Dad. You just threw me out like I didn't matter." "I know," he said again, and I could hear him choking up. "I'm so sorry. I can't even begin to make up for what I did. But I'm begging you, please, can we talk? Can we fix this?" "Fix it? How do you fix something like this? How do you just go back to normal after everything?" I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hang up, tell him it was too late, that he'd made his choice. But another part of me, a small part, missed him. Despite everything, he was still my dad. "I don't know, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know if I can just forget what happened." "I'm not asking you to forget," he said quickly. "I just want to make it right. Please, just give me a chance." I sat there, biting my lip, trying to figure out what to do. Was it worth it? Could I even trust him again after he'd sided with Claire and Nicole so easily? I felt torn between wanting to fix things and wanting to keep my distance, to protect myself from getting hurt again. "Where's Nicole now?" I asked, needing to know if she was still in the picture. He hesitated before answering. "She's staying with her mom's sister for a while. I couldn't have her here after everything. I needed time to think." That didn't surprise me. He probably sent her away to save face, to make himself feel better about what he'd done. But at least she wasn't around, which made the idea of talking to him a little easier to swallow. "I'll think about it," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not promising anything." There was a long pause on the other end, and I could hear him take a deep breath, like he was relieved just to have a chance. "That's all I'm asking for," he said softly. "Thank you." We hung up after that, and I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone, wondering what I'd just agreed to. Was I really ready to face him after everything? Could I even forgive him? When I told Jess about the call later that night, she gave me this look like she wasn't sure if I should trust him. And honestly, I didn't know if I could either. But at the same time, a part of me wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, my dad was telling the truth. That maybe he really was sorry. The next few days were rough. I kept thinking about the call, replaying it over and over in my head, trying to figure out what I should do. I didn't talk to Tyler about it yet. I wasn't ready for that conversation. But I knew eventually I'd have to make a decision. Was I going to meet with Dad? Or was I going to walk away for good? The whole thing weighed on me. I couldn't focus at work. And even when I was with Jess or Tyler, my mind was elsewhere. I kept waiting for something to click, for some sign to tell me what the right move was. But no sign came. It was up to me to decide. I spent the next week going back and forth in my head, trying to figure out what to do about my dad's call. I mean, it was like a weight was hanging over me and I couldn't shake it. Part of me was still angry, like really pissed off that he just threw me out without even listening. But then, there was that other part of me, the one that missed him, that wanted things to be different. It wasn't easy to just forget all the good moments we had before Claire and Nicole came into the picture. Jess kept telling me to take my time, that I didn't owe him anything, which was true. But the more I thought about it, the more I started to wonder if I was being stubborn. Was I holding on to my anger too much? Would meeting him really be that bad? Or would it just reopen old wounds that I'd been trying to heal? A few days after the call, Tyler and I were sitting at a park, just talking about random stuff. I hadn't brought up the whole thing with my dad yet, mostly because I didn't want to make it a bigger deal than it already was. But I guess Tyler could tell something was off. "You've been quiet lately," he said, looking over at me. "Everything okay?" I shrugged, picking at the edge of the bench. "I've just got a lot on my mind." He nodded like he understood, but then he paused, waiting for me to say more. And I realized I couldn't keep it bottled up anymore. "So," I told him. I told him about the call, about how my dad finally admitted that Nicole was the one sneaking guys into the Airbnb, and how now he wanted to meet and make things right. Tyler didn't say anything right away, just listened. That's one of the things I liked about him. He didn't rush to give advice or try to tell me what to do. He let me vent, and it felt good to get it all out. "So, what do you think you're gonna do?" he asked after I finished. "I don't know," I admitted, leaning back against the bench. Part of me wants to meet him just to hear him out, but the other part of me, I'm scared. What if he just hurts me again? What if he's only saying sorry because he feels guilty now that he knows the truth? Tyler thought about that for a second, then looked at me seriously. "You have every right to protect yourself. If you're not ready to forgive him, then you don't have to. But maybe meeting him isn't about forgiving him right now. Maybe it's just about hearing what he has to say." I let his words sink in. It wasn't like I had to forgive my dad right away, right? But maybe hearing him out would give me some closure at least. Maybe it'd help me finally put all this behind me one way or another. The next day, I decided to meet him. I texted him, keeping it short. "I'll meet you, tomorrow. Same place we used to go for breakfast." It was this little diner we used to go to when I was younger, before Claire and Nicole came into our lives. I figured it was neutral territory, somewhere that didn't have all the memories of the house and everything that went down there. The next morning, I got there early, mostly because I didn't want to feel rushed walking in. I sat in the booth, fidgeting with my phone, my heart racing. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I kept running through different scenarios in my head. What if he started apologizing the second he walked in? What if he blamed me again? What if he didn't even show up? But about 10 minutes later, the door opened, and there he was. My dad. He looked different, like he'd aged overnight. His face was tired, and his hair was a little grayer than I remembered. He walked in slowly, like he wasn't sure if I'd actually be there. He spotted me and gave a small nod before walking over and sitting down across from me. For a minute, neither of us said anything. It was just awkward silence. I didn't know where to start, and he looked like he was still trying to figure out what to say. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Thanks for meeting me." I nodded, not really trusting myself to speak just yet. I didn't want to come off too angry, but I also didn't want to act like everything was fine. "I've been thinking about what happened. A lot," he said quietly, his hands resting on the table. "And I know I messed up. I should have listened to you. I should have trusted you instead of jumping to conclusions." Hearing him say it out loud made something inside me relax just a little. At least he wasn't here to make excuses. I didn't want to believe that Nicole or Claire could be involved in something like that, he continued, shaking his head. "I didn't see it, and because of that, I lost you." That hit me hard. I could see the regret on his face, and I knew he wasn't faking it. But still, that didn't erase what had happened. "You didn't just lose me," I said, my voice shaky but steady. "You threw me out. You didn't even give me a chance to explain. You believed them over me, your own kid." "I know," he said quickly, nodding. "I know, and I'm sorry. I don't know how to make it right, but I want to try." There it was. He was sorry. He wanted to fix things. But could I let him back in after everything? Could I trust him not to hurt me again? "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, looking down at my hands. "It's not that simple." "You hurt me, Dad. You didn't even try to hear me out." He nodded again, like he expected that answer. "I understand. I'm not asking for forgiveness, not right away. I just want to be part of your life again, if you'll let me." We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us just taking it all in. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't ready to forgive him, but I wasn't ready to cut him off for good either. "I'll think about it," I finally said, looking him in the eye. "But things are different now. You can't just expect me to act like everything's okay." "I wouldn't expect that," he said quietly. I want a chance to prove that I'm sorry, that I've changed." We left it at that. He paid the bill, and we went our separate ways. As I walked out of the diner, I felt this strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted. But another part of me still felt heavy, like I was carrying around the scars from what happened. Maybe I'd give him another chance. Maybe I wouldn't. All I knew was that it was going to take time. And for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. Update. A few days after my meeting with Dad, I was still stuck in that weird place where I didn't know what to do. I hadn't decided if I wanted to let him back into my life, and honestly, I wasn't in a rush to figure it out. I kept telling myself that I needed time, that I didn't have to jump back into anything. But then I got another call from him, and this time it was different. I was just finishing up my shift at the diner when my phone buzzed. Seeing Dad's name on the screen sent that familiar mix of anxiety and curiosity through me. I hesitated for a second before answering. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, but my heart was racing. "Hey," Dad replied, his voice sounding tired, almost worn out. I need to tell you something. It's important." I could tell something big had happened just by the way he was talking, so I didn't say anything, just let him keep going. "Claire and we had a fight. A big one, about Nicole, and everything that happened," he started, his voice shaky but firm. "Turns out she knew all along. She knew what Nicole was doing down in the Airbnb, and she didn't say a word. She let me believe it was you." Hearing that hit me like a punch in the gut. I mean, I had always suspected that Claire had a part in all of this, but hearing Dad confirm it made my blood boil. She'd let him throw me out knowing I was innocent the whole time? "What?" I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "She lied to me," Dad continued, his frustration obvious. "Not only about Nicole, but about you too. She made up that whole thing about you taking the key, knowing it was Nicole all along. I can't believe I was so blind to it." I stood there in silence, trying to process what he was saying. Claire had been the one behind all of it, making sure I took the blame while Nicole kept getting away with her crap. I felt this mix of anger and relief, knowing that Dad finally saw the truth, but also furious that it had taken so long. "I kicked her out," Dad said, snapping me back to reality. "I couldn't live with her after what she did. She's gone. I told her to pack her stuff and leave." I blinked, trying to wrap my head around it. Dad kicked out Claire? After everything? "I'm sorry for everything," he said, his voice softer now. "I should have believed you from the start. I should have seen what was going on, but I didn't. And now I'm asking you. Would you be willing to come back home?" I didn't know what to say at first. I never thought this would happen. For months, I had convinced myself that I didn't need to go back, that I was better off on my own. But hearing Dad now, hearing the regret in his voice, made me realize how much had changed. He wasn't the same man who had thrown me out. He knew the truth now, and he wanted to make things right. I don't know, Dad, I said honestly. You hurt me. A lot. It's not easy to just forget that. I know, he said quickly. I'm not asking you to forget. I just want to make things right. I want you to come home and we can try to rebuild what we had. No more Claire, no more lies, just us. I stood there, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to say yes, to go back and finally have the home I'd been missing. But another part of me was scared. What if things didn't change? What if it was just another mistake waiting to happen? Let me think about it, I finally said, not ready to give him an answer right then. Take all the time you need, Dad replied. I'm sorry, and I hope you can find it in your heart to give me another chance. We hung up after that, and I sat down, my head spinning. I never thought I'd be in this position, where Dad was asking me to come back home. I didn't know what to do, but at least now, I had options.